First off, I just want to say good morning and welcome to the first day of ARM's meeting on the Mesa. I know we're all super excited to be here to catch up. I'm personally really excited to be in California. It's starting to get cold back in the Midwest, so good to be here. My name is Josh Ludwig. I'm the Global Commercial Director for ScaleReady. We're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, along with two of our partner companies, Wilson Wolf and Biotech. We actually cover North America and Europe territories, and we're the proud sponsor here. Basically, what does ScaleReady do? We are your technical experts to help with process optimization using our core technology. And really, we're strictly focused on the cell therapy aspect, so mainly T cells and NK cells within our product lines. And we do have the proven products of three best-in-class partners, the third partner being Biotech. So we kind of bring all of this together into a platform, and clients come to us, work with us, and say, how do we use these effectively? How do we scale? How do we, in this case, what we're talking about here, how do we get more patients treated? How do we bring this accessibility to a better state? So, from the client side, obviously, we're focused on reducing labor, time, investment, and increasing that speed to the market. So today's workshop, it's about prioritizing patient accessibility and sustainability and affordability. I think that's a big topic now. Maybe the field has changed in the last couple of years in terms of now bringing affordability to the front. I'm super excited to be joined by these expert panelists here and to talk through this important topic. And before I butcher everybody's intros, I'll hand it off to Steve. Go ahead.
Thanks, Josh. Am I on? Is that okay? Good. Yeah, so I'm Steve Gavel. I'm the commercial development lead at Legend Biotech. I've been in this great industry of ours for about 32 years now. Over the last 8 years, I've been specifically living in the cell and gene space. Before Legend Biotech, I was a commercial development lead at Celgene, where we were onboarding the Juno programs as well as the Bluebird program, the BB2121 program. So specifically that program, I was leading that charge. And then now, like I said, most recently, I've been working with Legend Biotech for the last about 5.5 years. And we just launched our lead program, our BCMA program, a little over a year ago. And I get involved in all of our pipeline development assets as well as our BD work. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good morning. My name's Jeff Leiter. I'm the CEO of Luminary Therapeutics. Kind of accidentally wound up in the cell and gene therapy space in 2012, running the operations for what was then PCT. I believe it's now Minaris. Had the good fortune of really kind of processing phase 1 through phase 3 cell therapy applications, if you will. Actually tech transferred in both Yescarta and Kymriah in the very, very early days. And then moved on and created a non-viral gene engineering company, which we sold, and now we're working on a therapeutic company, an allogeneic using gamma delta cells.
Good morning. I'm Jason Bock, CEO of CTMC. CTMC is a joint venture between MD Anderson Cancer Center and National Resilience. And for better or for worse, I very intentionally got into cell therapy. I was a 20-year career in small, medium, and large-sized biotech and biopharma developing biologics, bringing those into the clinic and as well as through to global commercialization. And then about 4 years ago, got connected with some people at MD Anderson and decided to try something somewhat novel. Moved down to Houston, Texas, and started a group there to help faculty members industrialize their innovations, turn them into therapeutics, and bring them into the clinic. We've since brought in the concept to partner with biotech companies to access industrial manufacturing coupled with leading-edge clinical development. In the last 18 months, we've filed 6 INDs on 6 novel cell therapies, and interested in seeing how those work in cancer patients. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Hi, I'm Joe Lomakin. I'm the head of strategy for precision medicine at Draper Laboratories. Draper is a nonprofit with over 50 years of experience serving U.S. national needs and national security interests. And we really work at the intersection of engineering and biology, and that's where my whole career has been at startups, maybe the last 5 years or so in cell therapy. So Draper works with the US government, with industry, with academia to really develop sort of cutting-edge engineering solutions and bring new technologies to market to help the public good. And over the last couple of years, we've been working within the cell and gene engineering therapy space to bring automation as well as custom, bespoke sort of unit operation modules to help people bring their therapies to market and ultimately treat more patients. Josh.
Thank you all. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. So we're excited to get into today's topic. It's really important because the landscape of the cell and gene therapy field is quite a bit different than this time last year or this time 2 years ago. It's always changing and evolving. But we've certainly seen a lot of companies fail to get to the market and really promising technology kind of, languish now that it's a little harder to raise money with the belt tightening. Obviously, we want to move faster than the, 7, 8, 9, however you classify approvals in the last, since 2015. And to that end, trying to think through this from a manufacturing efficiency standpoint, what discussions can we have so we can prioritize accessibility and affordability for patients to receive these treatments. And with that, that'll kind of be the theme today. But I'd like to kick off the first discussion point actually with you, Steve. We've had a chance to talk a few times now, but I think you have a unique perspective with a commercially approved CAR-T drug under your belt, kind of seeing the wars and the pitfalls. I'd be curious if you could set the stage for us in terms of where are we at from a patient access standpoint with your experience? How do you view the field?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Josh. And it's interesting because I have this conversation a lot with investors, especially Legend. We went public a couple of years ago. So one of the questions we often get from the investment community is, if you just step back and look at it objectively, has this cell therapy field been successful? And if you define success as basically meeting the needs of the market in terms of all the eligible patients out there, regardless of indications and drugs, has it been a success? And I think if you're true to yourself, you say no, at least from a commercial perspective. And you kind of scratch your head because if you think about it, and we had this conversation a little bit last night, it's kind of counterintuitive because many of these assets are really changing the paradigm and definitely putting patients in a much better position to be successful and their caregivers be successful with these therapies. But for whatever reason, we've had some missteps along the way. So I think this issue of access is a big issue. And I think one of the key areas and we all know this in this space, has been around manufacturing and the inability of the manufacturers to meet market demand out there. The second, there's an economic piece, which I don't think we're going to get into during this session. But the other bogey out there that has really slowed the uptick in these programs in terms of commercial inflection has been the lack of payment. So the market clearly has not been ready primarily through Medicare. Those of us who work in the cancer field, the majority of the patients are Medicare eligibles, and it's quite simply the DRG payments for cell therapies have been really inadequate, and they really have had marginal improvement over the last 5 to 6 years. But again, that does not become an issue around payment if I'm not able to manufacture enough drug product actually to go to the next step to try to get the drug actually reimbursed. So I think, again, to be true to ourselves as an industry within manufacturers, I wouldn't call it failures by no means. I think some programs have been better than others in terms of their success rates, but I'd probably give us a solid C. It's me.
And Steve, if I can ask,
Yeah.
Do you think it's you characterize it as missteps, or is it growing pains? I mean, how do you balance that of things we did wrong and we should fix, or is it this is part of a brand new modality?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a combination of a couple things. I think, like anything new, like I said, many of us have been doing this for a long time, right? And when you get into the space like I did about eight or so years ago, I think we're all guilty of I know I is bringing that history with me because that's what led to some success in the past. And then you quickly start figuring out in this space, you're dealing with a completely different animal.
Yeah.
In terms of there is no inventory, so to speak. Yeah. You have living drug product. You have all these variations, mostly around manufacturing and so forth and so on, that drive a commercial person crazy. And I know it drives our investors crazy because the models become very unpredictable, right? And the street does not like unpredictability, right? So I think it was learning pains that went on, and the combination of the learning pains that were going on in the industry, and I was trying to learn from the CD19s, right? And the challenge is, though, is that, as you guys know who are in this space already, is when you start identifying issues, oftentimes the resolution around those issues, the cycle times to fix those issues are often protracted. And we deal with regulatory agencies that are also learning with us. So that just puts a slow roll on this thing. So it's unfortunate, most importantly for patients who are waiting, because as we're learning, they're dying, many of them. And we're learning with our regulatory agencies on how to do this faster. So I think it's a combination of just a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So Jason, you've said, I think you said in one of our talks previously that cell therapy is kind of in the second inning, or it's early in the ball game. And I know you asked that question to Steve here about, is it because we don't know enough and it's a new industry, or are we making mistakes? I think it'd be interesting to hear about if there's common pitfalls that maybe Steve could highlight. But from your perspective, Jason, you've kind of seen the monoclonal antibody industry evolve and become a professional industry that's sustainable and makes good product. How do you see this progressing in cell therapy, or maybe start with where we're at today?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I see it as sort of growing pains. There's always we can do more. I think the biggest misstep we make is trying to just do things like we did before for other modalities, like you said, Steve. It's a different modality, and we have to take a step back and see, how do we approach this in a different way, understanding the constraints that we work under. We have to do things to increase the cycle time. We have to do things to lower the bar for innovation to get into the clinic and through to commercialization. What I take hope in is, if we put on our, time warp hats and remember back to like the 1990s when, antibodies were just coming out, and we started with chimeric antibodies, and we were at yields of like 50 mgs per liter. And we're like, okay, how are we ever going to turn this into a broad-based therapeutic modality? 50 mg per liter, everyone's doing calculations, scaling up bioreactors and things. And there, again, it was just focused on oncology because, okay, this is super expensive stuff. It's really hard to get cells to make antibodies. And over the last 20 years, 30 years, those titers and yields have gone up orders of magnitude, multiple orders of magnitude, and correspondingly cost of goods and accessibility has been driven up dramatically. So I think we're on this journey. We're going to get there. It's going to take a variety of stakeholders, from manufacturers, from innovators coming up with new products that are more potent, from regulators, from vendors coming up with new types of equipment that we can use that will lower cost of goods and increase accessibility. So it's going to take a whole village approach, and that's why, interesting new technologies, automation, and the like. It's going to take all of those. But I think we're going to get there. I mean, it's such a powerful modality. If you're having single-dose curative treatments, then this is what we're here for. This is what we do. We just got to continue to roll up our sleeves and work together to get there.
So I got a question kind of for Steve, but maybe towards Jeff in this end at Luminary, right? Pushing into the clinic now with approved IND or multiple or coming down the line here. Steve, you referenced that you've kind of learned to work with and grow with the regulatory agencies. How would you maybe give Jeff and the Luminary team, some inside baseball? How do they start working with the regulatory bodies early so that maybe you don't have fits and starts like you experienced?
Yeah, I'm not a regulatory expert. I usually have to deal with my regulatory teams who are saying we've got problems normally, and then how to correct them. Yeah, I can't speak per se on the regulatory front. that strongly. I think what I was getting at, there's so many issues to talk about, we don't have enough time. But I'll give you a case in point, at least from a commercial world, and because it does downstream impact manufacturing and so forth and so on, is even as the early days when I was brought into these programs, which in my world, early days is coming into the, really before the registration trials kick off, just to think through with our clinical teams what this program looks like. And we were talking on the phone, I think, before this meeting, and one of the things that I know I've done differently is we always have a TPP, a clinical TPP that we all model in the market to see how the market will move off of it. But we also have now created an operational TPP. And that's not something you never really had to, I never developed that before in my life. But we do that now at Legend, and I know through my partners at Janssen, they're doing the same thing because you have to ensure that you have an asset, but then you can't be ignorant in the fact of how will you operationalize and scale it. And also, how will the market do the same? And I think it's kind of problematic on two fronts. On the second front, the market has been experiencing modest issues because we haven't been able to scale it. But there will be a problem forthcoming in scale, but it'll be coming from the market. So I'm kind of round and dancing the regulatory question here. But the regulatory piece is, I'll give you another case in point maybe, out of spec, right? So I'll use our program, this is all public. It's true with all these programs where you're going through your clinical program and you're seeing certain out-of-spec rates. And all of a sudden you go through a regulatory approval process and all of a sudden the regulatory agencies come back with a different spec range than you had during your clinical trials. Well, as a commercial person as well as the clinical team, I mean, that's kind of problematic on a number of fronts. So now what drove to that decision with the agencies, I think we'll have to have some regulatory people talk about that piece of it. But that is something that during the planning and forecasting and manufacturing process, as you're starting to look forward to see, okay, we think we have a drug, now we have to start scaling. Like that was a bit of a surprise for us to see the difference that we were seeing in the clinical setting versus where the agency was coming at it in terms of where they wanted to put our manufacturing specifications was quite a bit different. So that's just a regulatory example. Now, how do you avoid that? I think you need to talk to the regulatory folks who have been part of that process and those dialogues with the agencies to see what happened or what didn't happen that caused that.
It's a lot of good feedback, and maybe I'll direct this one towards Jeff because I know you have a few different clinical programs coming, different cell types you're going after. We like to, at ScaleReady, we're always thinking about how can we help the field adopt and standardize, key bits of the manufacturing process. Every manufacturing process is going to have kind of unique aspects, secret sauce, if you will. But Jeff, how is Luminary viewing like the ability to standardize a platform that you could use and know that what you're characterizing now, you can point back to in a couple years as you're heading into pivotal?
Sure. So currently our programs are autologous, but we've moved everything over to an allogeneic platform. And just briefly coming back to the challenges that we face, which everybody knows, if you take the quality of your starting materials on a scale of 1 to 10, in an autologous setting, you're going to get everything from a -3 to the best case, a 6. So those are going to be hard to manufacture, which is why we've had all these challenges.
That's right.
On the allogeneic side, when you get a healthy donor, you can very much characterize and get repeat donors. So now your range of starting material is going to be maybe 6 to 8, or maybe even 8.5. So you're starting from a much different place. And so for us, we're quickly porting everything over to using gamma delta cells. Our manufacturing process is a 23-day manufacturing process, but we're able to get a 3,000-fold expansion of engineered cells regardless of what CAR construct we put in and how big it is. And so from a standardization, this avails itself being able to standardize. I'll give a shout out to ScaleReady and G-Rex. We use the G-Rex and we get just great expansion in those. But we characterize our steps every step of the way over that 23-day process. And we're able to do that because we're not rushing to treat a dying patient.
So, and maybe Joe, from your perspective on this standardizing, you're coming from a unique place, right? The nonprofit Draper here to kind of advance the field. How do you guys and you personally approach this, helping the field standardize or taking feedback from many different groups that are slightly different, but trying to shoehorn it into a solution that works.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's been interesting to hear from the other panelists as well. I think to some extent we sit, upstream in the funnel, much more toward the innovation end, towards the folks that are still trying to get into their R&D and are thinking about all these hard questions in terms of how do we design for right now to get to this current hurdle, but ultimately something that also can evolve as the regulatory landscape changes, as the scale at which you have to operate changes, as maybe even the guidance changes around what you need to produce. And I think that's not an easy thing, trying to think of not just how you hit the target, but what is the path dependence that you have to account for as you think about how to make your company successful so it doesn't die in the vine and can navigate the current climate. And I think, some of the trends we see is actually people doing that kind of planning, where in the past it was just, let's just do something, let's do anything. And our ability to, I think, provide some novel tools that allow people to get a lot of real-time data, to be able to leverage the automation capability early so that you do standardize the process and maybe your range isn't quite from the donor's -3 to 5, but maybe, can you use, some of the feedback loops associated with automation to actually narrow that range because you ultimately will have to. I think that's where we really aim to support. And ultimately, we see ourselves as a nonprofit partner that can evolve with these companies as they grow, because whatever solution we put together today isn't going to be the solution that they're going to want 2 years from now. So it's really, how do you collect the data today that's going to help you make educated guesses about where you need to go, and how do you have, an automation and a biology partner that can help you evolve the tools at the pace you need them to evolve. I think the comment that you made earlier about we just have to iterate faster, right? I think we all know that we don't want to make cell therapies today the way that we don't want to make them that way in the future. So it's really about how do you make that cycle faster and faster. And I think that comes from using modular tools that you can repurpose, as the process shifts, but also how do you develop the internal muscle so that you can make those iterations quick and data-based.
Yep. If I could add on to what Joe was saying, in terms of regulatory and standardization, I think we all, in some ways, long for standardization because it makes our life simpler. We understand what the expectations are and things. But I think there's a flip side to it as well, that it's still, I'll go back to the second inning theme, it's still very early, and part of our role in working with regulators is to inform and educate all that we're seeing. They can help us too with all they're seeing, but we have to help them as well. So for example, I'll give a specific example. A very common release criteria for engineered cell therapies or CAR-Ts is viral copy number, or VCN. And the field has sort of settled into this, less than 5 viral copy numbers is okay. More than 5 is bad. It just sort of evolved historically that way, but everyone sort of latches onto it because, okay, I know if we're less than 5, we're okay. FDA's not going to get after us. We were developing a partnered product, and the way that product works, we need higher expression levels. And so we actually needed viral copy numbers higher than 5 to get the product to really be active. And so at first, there was a lot of consternation, internal discussion between us and the partner, it has to be below 5. Do we just have to kill the program because FDA is not going to accept it? But instead, we put together a robust data package explaining why we needed it to be higher, that we totally understood the product, characterized it well, as Jeff was saying, and then looked at the potential safety impacts and where integration sites and all of that. We presented all of that to FDA, and then to their credit, they're like, looks like a reasonable approach. Go.
Yeah, you knew what you were talking about. You had all the information that they wanted, essentially.
Yeah. But if we just said, hey, we want 8 VCN instead of 5, I'm like, yeah, I'd go back and try again. I think engaging in that process while we're still in this early stage of the game is really important.
And I'd be curious how that conversation would have gone so you're kind of making one major adjustment to what is the standard there. How would it have worked if you were maybe bringing in all these new novel technologies? And I guess where I'm thinking you kind of have to stepwise make improvements and progress, and to Joe's point, iterate faster and faster. But you're in a unique position, Jason, in this partnership down there. I'm sure you have all the new toys, all the stuff that's not on the market. How do you discern what's a valuable use of your time to evaluate, and what's that tipping point of, we'll wait, or we want to bring it into the PD lab to play with?
Right. No, it is fantastic. It's a great setup for evaluating new technologies because we have so many projects moving through and into the clinic, and we get so many opportunities to interact with FDA throughout, from pre-INDs and INDs. It seems like every few weeks we have another submission. So I don't know. I think Joe can probably speak to which technologies move the needle better than I can. We just look for things that are pain points for us, and where are technical solutions that can address those in terms of closing systems, in terms of growing cells to higher densities, reproducibility, simplicity, automation. Those are the main things we look at in finding solutions that are robust to that.
And Steve, do you get pulled into those conversations? I mean, I got to assume, every company's knocking on your door, hey, check out our new, widget or end-to-end.
Yeah, we do.
What's your litmus test there?
Yeah, like there's a capacity issue that we're all kind of managing through, but also speed. What we look at, we monitor very closely because of the types of patients we treat, is the time frame by which we get the drug product back to the patient. So, because everybody wins in that scenario, right? So depending upon what's being considered, the key questions I have are pretty straightforward in terms of not only the capacity increasing that may go on, but also the speed by which, or will these technologies potentially have any benefit around, we talked about out of specification, hitting more of our out of spec rates or improving them. So those three dimensions, speed, out of spec, and capacity, are really the key things that I look at.
And I would assume too, like, what's to the vendors, to the new novel technology, what's your pathway towards regulated product? This is cool, it's interesting, but can you manufacture your product consistently from an actual, the tool perspective? And then, have you checked the box? Have you spoken to the regulators? You don't want to be breaking new ground for a technology that you're adopting.
Yeah, I mean, we chat. We did chat with a fair amount of engineers, but trying to explain and understand where this technology, for example, will be, whether it be remote technology where you're literally in hospitals, which I remind them, hospitals don't have a lot of room, no matter how small your thing is. And then the whole business around, from an approval process, I know how difficult it is with central manufacturing when you decentralize things. I haven't really heard any really great answers from the folks that we've been chatting with. But anyway, a lot of cool ideas. It just matter, can you implement them?
Yeah, I think it's a back and forth, and that's why, again, for groups like Jason, that and you see a lot of different programs. You see the ones from academic center getting transferred in, so you are a good proving ground for the new technology out there. And as long as you have enough bandwidth and space to evaluate, it's super important for all the tool providers to get their products tested and iterate those tools, just like we're talking about iterating the whole process.
Yeah, I think changes happen in sort of two buckets. One is sort of evolutionary changes, incremental changes that are really important. 5% here, 10% there, 6% there. And I would imagine in the commercial space, that's what you do. But that's where you can really work out those things that are important. You get another 5% yield, you reduce your out of specs by 6%. It's a big impact.
Huge financial impact as well.
Yeah.
In terms of
Falls right to the bottom line.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. And on the other hand, I think the industry, the field, is going to need some step changes too. If antibody field maybe was going from large stainless steel reactors to single-use bioreactors, that was like a step change that changed access and ability to scale really quickly. We're going to need some of those step changes as well. Step changes primarily occur at very early stages of development. It's hard to do like a big step change once you're a commercial product.
Exactly.
That's why Amgen is still making EPO and roller bottles, not bioreactors, because it's a commercial product, hard to change. But we need both of those, and we have to find a way of not being afraid or lowering the barrier for these step changes to occur. And just tying to something we were talking about before about standardization, we have to also not use standardization as a crutch. Like, for example, sterility testing, right? So sterility testing, okay, there's been some evolutionary changes, reducing real-time release of products from a 14-day traditional sterility test down to some best in case, I think, are about 5 days. Oh, 3, good.
Go.
Yeah,
Talk to Jeff.
see, every day getting a little bit better. Still, if you're relying on microbes to grow, you're going to be limited to a certain amount and how much you can reduce that. What if we change that whole perspective and instead of using growth, look at next generation sequencing for sterility assessments that you can do in a few hours and get to. There's a lot of challenges. We can talk up through 3 hours of all the challenges associated with that. But if you could move to next generation sequencing for sterility, even for mycoplasma, you could probably consolidate 3, 4, 5, 6 release tests into one test. And that would be a step change that would simplify, speed, and reduce release risk for products. So we're going to need, I think, both of those evolutionary and step changes.
Yeah, that's a great point in terms of what can we improve on in the manufacturing process. So maybe along those same lines and thinking, how do we kind of begin at the end? We have Legend up here who has reached that point, and so maybe Steve can give us a comment. But if beginning at the end in mind, how do we set up our manufacturing decisions early? Again, it could be release testing on the back end, it could be characterization on the front end. Basically, how do we as an industry start thinking about treating that full accessible patient population early? And I'm looking at like a Luminary, and you guys made a change to say, hey, we want to be able to manufacture larger doses. So you went the allo route and can do, what'd you say, a couple hundred doses per run pretty easily. But yeah, Steve, from your perspective, if you could go back in a time machine and say, what decisions would we maybe look at differently when we were developing this process?
It's tricky, right? All this stuff is always prefaced by it's tricky because if you use whether it be this program, other programs, really large patient populations to scale in order to address if you are successful clinically, it takes such an enormous financial investment early in order to predict that level of success, knowing that it's very difficult to achieve that level of success because you clearly don't know what your clinical profile looks like until the data actually reads out, right? So you're betting, so you're kind of stuck in the situation where, I'll use our program, where you have potentially rapid approvals of very large patient populations quickly, that puts a lot of pressure on a manufacturing team to scale and build out and keep up. So in order to do it differently is that you would really need to be comfortable taking on a lot of financial risk up front in anticipation of hopefully having a really dominant clinical profile in order to pull all that manufacturing through. That's a big one you got to swallow hard on, right? And we used to have a lot of those conversations because you just don't know, right? So you kind of get stuck in that middle zone of we're going to take our best educated guess, and you do. And then if you hit on something that's really remarkable, like we were pretty darn fortunate, then you have to hustle. Yeah. And then unfortunately, as you're hustling, patients are waiting, right? And you get stuck in this situation where no one wants to be in, but you can't almost afford to invest the way you'd like to hit that major addressable population. But again, it's a risk. It's a real big risk decision.
Let me put a finer point on that because I've felt your pain in my PCT days. So as you go into your phase 1, it's critically important to make sure you're making a safe product. It's not critically important to make sure that you're making an optimized product. But the window to do that is between phase 1 and phase 2. Back to your point, you have to kind of assess, is this going to be a product that's going to get all the way to BLA? And if it is, you got to do that work right as the clinical team has you in the clinic, the manufacturing team has to prepare for phase 2 and 3 because you're not going to have changes between 2 and 3.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit, I think, from our perspective. I think encouraging comment from you in that I think you see the need for those revolutions and you appreciate those are coming. And I do think that there's young companies, stealth companies, companies that are just bubbling up that are very much internalizing the current climate and recognizing that they're going to sort of from the ground up have to address elements of the manufacturing process, elements of the QC in a fundamentally different way and make that a core of who they are. I think the tricky part for them is that for the whole thing to work, there's so many pieces. And maybe you can take on sterility, but then you're not going to take on a whole new manufacturing process over here. And so I think the challenge for the field is really, in order for us to iterate faster, how do we work together so that we can share these pieces more efficiently, right? So if one company is going to take a bet on a new sterility process and another company takes a bet on a new piece of automation software that couples with, again, then some modules that already exist, like G-Rex reactors or something, how do we efficiently transfer those learnings between each other? Because that's what's really going to enable the field. Yeah. And from Draper's point of view, as ultimately a nonprofit sort of agency that's trying to help this industry grow, we're trying to always figure out how can we assist in bringing all those pieces together. Because I think that's what's going to allow us to get to the market faster with these new approaches that are going to be shorter in manufacturing, cheaper, faster, all of those points of merit that you articulated earlier, that really have to be moved to address the patient population that's waiting desperately.
I guess what I'm hearing maybe is, and I'll let you jump in, Jason, but just kind of this concept of you have to begin with the end in mind. You have to kind of assume that program you're going to work on is successful. So in your case, Jeff, right, you're in the clinic now, but it's how do we make this process sustainable for the near future, but hopefully amenable to kind of future advancements in automation. And certainly that's been our approach, putting our tools together, is that modular sense of if they are modular and there's something better that comes in, it's pretty easy to, but you can actually modify the process to incorporate new technology.
And to pick up on what Joe and Steve were saying, and then you, Josh, I think the way we can accelerate the advancement of this field is through creative partnerships. The way, and I know I keep going back to antibodies, but that's a relevant example for us to look back on. In my view, the way antibody field developed was there were a few huge companies, Amgen, Genentech, who basically gathered together all the innovation, had a lot of the product development, had a lot of the regulatory insights, they basically aggregated everything and did everything themselves, somewhat in a silo. Then through sort of diaspora, people left those companies. Everyone hired somebody from Amgen or Genentech and said, okay, you're my product development guy, teach me everything that those guys learned. And that's how the field developed. That's probably partly why it took 30 years, because there wasn't a lot of cross-fertilization. There wasn't a lot of partnerships. It was all these silos. And so I think the opportunity we have at this early stage is to come up with creative ways of partnering so that individual companies don't have to take on that massive capital risk by themselves. And part of what we're trying to do at CTMC is, okay, we work with some leading vendors like ScaleReady and Ori Biotech to bring in their novel technologies, their advancements, try and stay at the edge of the cutting edge of the field. And then innovators who come up with novel products don't have to also do all the technology development. They can focus on coming up with the most potent, most best engineered product. That's where their big addition can be. And then, with an organization like us, we can help them manufacture through the regulatory interactions and get that product into the clinic quickly and see if all those connections work well. And just as Steve was saying, reduce that cycle time and say, okay, this set of connections we pulled together, got to an IND in 12 months, and got to see how well it worked in the clinic quickly. Increasing that cycle time is so important.
I think, increasing the cycle time like we've been talking about, and then maybe shifting towards, we're talking about how do you incorporate new tools, new tech. Is there a way for the field to kind of stair-step their way towards automation? I know that's really kind of this big catch-all term, how do we automate everything? But we're also saying that it's nice to have a modular system so that if new technology comes in that's better than what we're using for that building block, you can swap it out. So how do we, and maybe I'll kick it to Joe, how do you stair-step the field towards automation, and what do you see being successful?
I mean, part of what we see is the opportunity to recognize that the process is going to evolve and you're going to need partners, right? And I think a little bit of our unique vantage point is being that engineering partner, because if you want your process automated and standardized, the challenge is now you're locked into something you don't like, right? And so you're gonna have to change it, and you have to change it again, and you have to change it again. And so I think as a company, I think you have to recognize that that's gonna be actually really, really important if in the long run you're gonna be able to iterate quickly. And how do you do that, right? So maybe you develop those capabilities internally. Maybe you have to more strongly and directly partner with some of the instrumentation makers, I think is maybe when you say creative partnerships, maybe that's one of the things you're alluding to. Or in our case, the people that come to us, they sort of decide to work with ultimately an engineering first firm that's gonna take the solutions that are out there, integrate them, and evolve on that system so that you have something for your clinical trial, because you got to make that milestone, but that's not going to end all be all. And so how do you have a solution that takes the off-the-shelf pieces and can iterate on those and collect the data along the way so that you can make the well-articulated arguments to ultimately, I think, sway the regulatory agency in a way that you're going to need to do. I think you made a really good point, and that's been sort of my experience in my past life, working on medical devices that are very, very different from the status quo. The regulatory agency will listen. It just needs information. Right. Information costs a lot, especially if it's not built into the way that you're working, right? So I think that's where really it becomes a challenge. So recognizing that and making sure that your manufacturing process can give you the information all along the way, so that when you need to pivot and convince the regulatory agency that, oh, actually we have this whole other spec, don't you worry, you have those correlative studies built into how you work.
Yeah, and I think from the ScaleReady end and kind of my background coming from the G-Rex technology and helping that evolve over time, I'm pretty excited what we're doing now with a number of groups, but in particular Cellular Origins, the automation company, and they come from the automation partnership. A lot of experience just taking the basic building blocks, the core technology that again grows the cells well in this case, but just how can we step our way into automating that and reducing the handling, because I think for everybody here, I'm sure, and Jason probably too, even though you're in a hotbed down in Houston, it's hard to find and attract and retain the best talent.
Yeah, I think attracting talent is always a challenge, but I think having a critical mass of talent focused on enough talent to be able to really move the needle on any particular aspect. So for a company to build enough internal engineering experience to do that, they could, but it's going to be really hard, it's going to be really costly, it's probably going to distract them from their core business. Yes. And so instead, partner with a group like Joe's to do that. Now, the trade-off is you feel a little lack of control. I like being able to walk out of my office and go yell at the engineering guy and tell him to fix it, and now I have to, drive down the street or get Joe on a call and say, what the hell's going on? But I think the benefits of these kind of partnerships and pulling together groups that are really experienced in their areas much outweigh the downsides of it. And I think the silver lining in the capital markets today is that partnership model is more encouraged. Then you don't have as much the freedom to go out and raise $300 million and try and do everything yourself. It's probably not a good idea. We saw a lot of probably over exuberant spending to try and do like that kind of thing. And so now we all have to tighten our belts and focus on how we can figure out these more efficient partnership models.
And I think in a sense, it's what is your core expertise as a company, and most of these companies are getting formed from maybe the academics that develop the program. Certainly you got to build enough infrastructure around it, but how do you keep, the main thing is to keep the main thing. We need to focus on manufacturing our product. We're not necessarily experts in that, so what do? You can reach out and ask for help. Hey, have you guys done processes like this before? Oh yeah, we have kind of a standard workflow that can get you 80% of the way there. Jeff, what do you all see then? Kind of hearing this, where would your no commitments, but are you kind of on that track on finding a partner to manufacture your product as you reach into the clinic, or trying to do that all on your own?
I mean, I'd say we're still in the phase 1, so we haven't turned our attention yet to how do we really optimize our manufacturing process. But again, given if we're going to allogeneic versus autologous, it's a completely different approach. Now, allogeneic still needs to prove itself as effective as autologous. I think it's going to. But we will embark upon kind of what are our best partners, what is our best optimization of our 23-day process, hopefully about 9 to 12 months from now. I mean, we certainly will seek out partners and where I ran a CDMO for 2.5 years. Nobody likes to be in a bunny suit. We used to have processes that took 24 hours to sort Tregs, and you had to be in a bunny suit across 2 different people. Nobody likes that. So ultimately, this industry will find its way to automation, but I think there's certain elements that lend themselves to automation at the beginning and kind of the final cell expansion, but the middle of the engineering and what cocktails of cytokines you're going to put in that is uniquely different to each CAR construct, that's the part that's the challenge in my opinion.
And I'll come back to the field, Jason, like you were suggesting in the sense of it's not as easy to go out and raise $300 million and then just try to do it all on your own. But in that vein of sustainability challenges as folks look to commercialize, like what strategies do you see as being successful, right? How do people understand where they're going to make mistakes because they lock themselves in on a process that's not scalable? How do you, as somebody that has a lot of programs coming to you, most likely, and you've seen a lot, how do you educate those folks on the pitfalls they're probably going to step in?
Oh, right. So I think it's just open discussion. I think it's important to set up the business structures to allow for this kind of aligned incentives, or if you have a business structure where, hey, we pay you if you do these certain amount of services, then okay, we'll try and figure out ways of doing more services so you pay us more. None of those things I just said focuses necessarily on how do we get this product into the clinic as quickly as we can, how do we get the most robust product that has the longest legs to get to a BLA successfully and beyond. And so I think it's important to set up these, when I say creative partnerships, I mean really thinking about the business structure that will support aligned goals of, hey, if this is successful, if the different partners all make investments and this is successful, then we all benefit. And I think that's really important. It underlies a lot of things. You can have fantastic people trying to do partnerships, but if there's a sort of, if the business aspects are against each other, eventually that will win out even over the best of intentions and personalities and things. So it's a little bit under the surface because we don't often talk about these kind of things, but I think these aligned incentives to enable creative partnerships is another really important aspect.
Yeah, we need the whole field. We need everybody to understand you got to set up the win-win-wins, especially as we get more complex in terms of therapeutic developer going to a CDMO that's working with a tool provider to advance everything. How do you share the risk? How do you share the success and move it forward that way? We got about 10 minutes left. I don't know if we're set up to ask any questions from the audience. Maybe I'll look back to the audio guys if there's a microphone. It's a small enough room.
Oh,
The cube.
interesting shaped microphone.
What?
What in the world? Hello, talking about technology.
Yeah.
Is that a,
Good morning, everyone. My name is Luminary. I'm from Florida, A&M University. My question is this. My area of research is on pharmacoeconomics and health outcomes. And we know when it comes to patient accessibility, we have a lot of factors to consider. We have the accessibility, affordability, and majorly having the product available. My question is, at the point, I think we need other stakeholders to come into play when it comes to sustainability, because there are a lot of forces outside there, aside demand and supply, that will affect how the product gets to the final consumer. So I'm asking, at what point do we bring these stakeholders into the manufacturing processing? Thank you.
I just want to make sure I caught that. So what stakeholders you're saying that we haven't
Right.
brought
When
in
it comes to production, we have a lot of stakeholders. Of course, people that are producing, they have their vendors, they have their software engineers, they have the researcher, but then we have the payer, which is more of the Medicaid, the Medicare people, we have the patient, we have the community at large, we have the researchers, the academicians. At what point do we bring them in? Because at the end of the day, we don't want to produce and leave them in the store. We want to make profit. We want people to have good health as well. Because we are looking at it from the aspect of the global arena. Some things might be rare, some diseases might be rare in the United States. But when you go to a large population, say, like for example, India and Africa, you can get people that are ready to buy this product. But how do we make it affordable? And that is what I'm saying. At what point do we bring other stakeholders so that at the end of the day, when we produce, we have this product? Thank you.
Great question. So from my perspective, I mean, I'll give a plug to the conference we're at. ARM works tirelessly to try and get the payer population and the government regulations incorporated into the new transformation of cell therapies and how do you potentially pay for a curative. So ARM is working every day on that matter. Now I'm going to give a plug for Luminary that I gave one for ARM. We're pretty convinced with our allogeneic product that we're going to bring the cost down to $15,000 per patient product because we can make 250 doses per healthy donor. So I think once you can bring the cost down significantly, which in autologous is hard, it's just there is not a plausible way to do it in autologous. Again, as I said earlier, allogeneic has to prove its day in the sunshine like autologous, but if we get there with the allogeneics, you're going to bring down both accessibility and price, and then you won't have such a restraint from payers, is my opinion.
Just to sort of provide the counterpoint, because I was at an interesting conference hosted by Deloitte a couple weeks ago in DC, and there were a lot of payers there. And, you know, I was actually really, I mean, I don't interact with payers probably as much as like Legend does, but what I heard from them was they said, yeah, this single dose curative, high cost autologous type therapy is really novel for us. We don't know how to deal with it. It doesn't fit in any of our models. And yeah, we haven't figured it out. And I think a little bit of what happens is they're like, hey, if we could shift over to allogeneic and that works, and then that'll fit into a better model that we're used to. I just don't want to rely on that. Like autologous is curing cancer today, single dose treatments, multiple
40 to
products.
50% of the time.
What, 40 to 50%
And
of the
only
time?
in blood
Right.
cancers.
Yeah, and those were 40 to 50%.
Bispecifics are already doing about as well as CAR Ts in the last 2 years.
Right. I mean, but I guess my point, Jeff, is allogeneic, just like you said, is a great aspiration. Hasn't shown itself in the clinic yet.
Starting to.
Okay.
I can show you data. We can talk about
That would be great. That would be great. But I think if we set up the dynamic where payers can just cover their ears and cover their eyes and hope for us to figure everything out, I think that's a bad dynamic. I think that's that's a dynamic that will, if we have to live with this kind of uncertainty that Steve laid out about reimbursement for ongoing, I think that's going to be a problem. And so I really appreciate what ARM's doing to push that.
I agree with what you're saying. And look at I'm trying to remember which the in vivo therapy is at $2 million. There are some payers that are getting on board, but coming back to Steve's point, Medicare, you think Medicare is going to jump to the front of the line and embrace new stuff? I mean, that's the biggest challenge of why oncology patients are struggling to get treated with access is because of Medicare's ability to pay for this in an autologous setting.
Do you mind if I jump in? Because
Go
this
ahead,
is a
Steve.
lot of my stuff. Finally, we're talking about some of the things I could kind of
We
weigh
are
in on.
about 5 minutes
I was going
left.
to say,
so
how
we'll
much
wrap
time
up
do we
here.
have?
Heated it up.
Because I think we're talking about two related things. I mean, the question I think was sort of outside this country is how do you take these
Yeah,
products
yeah, right.
and make sure accessible for everyone. So with my partner Janssen, we discussed this a whole lot, and you're right. One of the drivers the rate limiting drivers is cost. The other rate limiting driver, honestly, is just getting reimbursed in these geographies that we could somehow make a business model work.
Right.
The problem with the auto programs, and you see it across the board, CD19s, BCMA programs, you see a very restricted global footprint. And honestly, it's a byproduct of the cost basis we work within just in the manufacturing of these programs, and then the very limited, from a pure reimbursement perspective, the loss there is pretty substantial. So we cannot, quite frankly, work through a business model solution. We'd love to, quite frankly, we would love to do that, but we're challenged there. The other component is just the scaling up. We can't even, we're looking at markets today, within the US, for example, we're having challenges just scaling up to meet the needs of individual markets. But you're absolutely right, it's a key rate limiter. We've recognized that as well. We have an ethics panel that we work through on a continual basis in terms of identifying next markets to move into. But it's a big challenge for us. If I can end it though on the question specific around the US, private insurers love these drugs, full stop. And the reason why they love these drugs, even though the upfront cost is pretty substantial for them, is because they look at the data and they look at the potential of a disease-free interval being quite substantial. So depending upon what disease state you are in, I happen to play in one there's a lot of options for physicians. Options mean money for payers. So the fact that if there are new modalities, whether it be CAR T, autos, allos, whatever, that could provide this in essence cost break, okay, it's another way to look at it, they're all in, they love this. And you're absolutely right with Medicare, that's 65, depending upon who you treat within what cancer you're in, you're looking at it between 60 to 70% of that payer mix is Medicare related. That's a problem. When we first started talking today, I said the two rate limiters around access is manufacturing and payment. And I said the payment piece of it, we just have, because we haven't scaled, the payment, hospitals are hurting, believe me, many are hurting when they move forward with cell therapies. It's hard to believe, but it's true. We've done the models multiple times. So we need, and we have been, and we've been petitioning quite hard for years now, Medicare to rethink how they go about reimbursing these cell therapies, especially when they're administered and they're confined within the confines of a hospital. Because Part A right now under Medicare reimbursement is quite a challenge for our hospitals.
Awesome.